So, like I said, you had a lot of conversations with Claude. Can you just map out what those conversations are like? What are some memorable conversations? What's the purpose, the goal of those conversations?
Yeah, I think that most of the time when I'm talking with Claude, I'm trying to kind of map out its behavior in part. Like, obviously, I'm getting like helpful outputs from the model as well. But in some ways, this is like how you get to know a system, I think, is by like probing it and then augmenting, like, the message that you're sending and then checking the response to that. So, in some ways, it's like how I map out the model. I think that people focus a lot on these quantitative evaluations of models. And this is a thing that I've said before, but I think in the case of language models, a lot of the time, each interaction you have is actually quite high information. It's very predictive of other interactions that you'll have with the model. And so I guess I'm like, if you talk with a model hundreds or thousands of times, this is almost like a huge number of really high quality data points about what the model is like. Um, in a way that like lots of very similar but lower quality conversations just aren't, or like questions that are just like mildly augmented and you have thousands of them might be less relevant than like 100 really well selected questions.
Listen, you're talking to somebody who, as a hobby, does a podcast. I agree with you 100%. If you're able to ask the right questions and are able to hear, like, understand the, like, the depth and the flaws in the answer,
Hmm.
you can get a lot of data from that.
Yeah.
So, like, your task is basically how to probe with questions.
Yep.
And you're exploring, like, the long tail, the edges, the edge cases, or are you looking for, like, general behavior?
I think it's almost like everything. Like because I want like a full map of the model, I'm kind of trying to do the whole spectrum of possible interactions you could have with it. So, like, one thing that's interesting about Claude, and this might actually get to some interesting issues with RLHF, which is if you ask Claude for a poem, like, I think that a lot of models, if you ask them for a poem, the poem is like fine. Usually it kind of like
Yeah.
rhymes and so if you say, like, give me a poem about the sun, it'll be like, yeah, it'll just be a certain length. It'll like rhyme. It'll be fairly kind of benign. And I've wondered before, is it the case that what you're seeing is kind of like the average